Okay, this is the video for eye number 2, part of the facial anatomy practice assignment. So for this drawing, we are drawing the left eye, and we can tell that because the tear duct is on the left side of the screen. For this eye, what I'm going to do to start, I'm going to start with a horizontal line. And what's going to happen with this horizontal line is this is going to mark where the tear duct and the edge of the eye are. So these are on the same plane. So what I'm going to do to start, I'm going to start by making this letter C type shape for the tear duct. And so this horizontal line is going to split that tear duct in two. And then the end of this line is going to mark where the edge of the eye is, or the corner of the outside part of the eye. So after I've made the tear duct, I'm going to make a curved line that will then end over here. So if you need to, you can start on one side and then begin the curve on the other if that helps you balance it out. Now, for this particular eye, what happens is that once we have this eye line in, and we'll refer to this as the eye line several times throughout this drawing, and once we start working on portraiture, we'll talk about this eye line. What happens with this particular eye is the amount of space underneath the eye line is uh, not as tall as what happens above this eye line. And so knowing that, if I were to draw the bottom of the eye right here, it would be way too open and wide. So I'm going to sketch this kind of guideline right here. And so now from here to here is taller than from here to here. So that's a good placement and start for this particular part of the eye. Now, once I have that, I'm just going to curve this up to the outside corner and edge of the eye. And then for the tear duct, this is going to be fairly similar to what we did for eye number 1. So you have a slightly curved line that comes about this far, and then it's going to gently drop and curve into this bottom portion. So once we have this overall shape, we're in pretty good position to continue the drawing. Now, what I'm going to do next, I need to find roughly the middle of this space. So just imagine that this eye has been drawn in what we could consider like a rectangular box. So within this box, we want to split it in two. So just approximate where the middle of this rectangular box would be. And so this is going to help us place the pupil. And what happens is the bottom of the pupil is on this eye line. So we know the bottom of the pupil is going to be here. The edge of the iris is going to come past this kind of center point in the eye. So I'm going to go ahead and place the pupil. And with this eye, it looks like this person is kind of looking off to the side because their pupil and iris are not immediately in the center of this space. So I'm going to start drawing the pupil or the black part of the eye. But we do have this light reflection that we need to include. And so it's a fairly oblong disc-like shape. And much like eye number 1, we're just going to leave that reflection white. And I think I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And there's kind of like a dark spot in the middle of it. And the top of the pupil is essentially going to meet the top of this light reflection or the disc that we just drew. Now, for the rest of the iris, as I mentioned, the iris is going to come past the center point just a little bit. And with this particular iris, the top is going to be hidden by the upper eyelid. And then just a small portion is going to be hidden by the bottom eyelid. And then there's just a small sliver or triangular type shape of space on this side where the sclera is, or the white of the eye. So it may take quite a few sketch lines and markings to get that circular shape that you need. And I need to improve the shape of my pupil just a little bit. Okay, so once we have that, we can go ahead and put in some of the markings for the iris. So we're still going to work with radial symmetry. We're still going to work with these hatch lines. Now, the coloring for this particular eye is darker, so it tells us that this person probably has brown eyes. And we don't see quite as much texture as we did in eye number one. So those hatching lines and texture lines aren't quite as noticeable. Now, there's also a slight sliver of a light reflection above this disc shape that we drew. So I'm just going to want to remember to leave a little bit of white in here. So I'm just going to sketch out that rough kind of white reflection right above. And I'm going to continue with my hatch lines. And much like what we saw with the very first eye that we drew, the upper eyelid is going to create a shadow, and it's going to darken the very top part of the iris. So this top part of the iris should be a bit darker. And then for the lower portion of the iris, it's not this bright, so we just have to add more dark markings to darken that part up. But I'm going to make these a little more sporadic so it doesn't look like it's overly shadowed. Now, for this particular eye, there is a bit of a reflection or something on this side. So we can always create that with our eraser. And so it lines up pretty close with the pupil. There's another very light mark right here. And if you take too much away with your eraser, you can always go back in with your pencil and touch it up. Okay, so we have just the basics down for the iris now and the pupil and the light reflection. So we're now going to look at the upper portion of the eye where the eyelid fold is. So what we're going to notice is, where does the upper eyelid fold start? Well, it starts roughly in the same location where the bottom of this light reflection would be. So if you just sketch a parallel line to the eye line, that will help us put the eyelid fold in. So where this line and the vertical line intersect, this is a good place to start that fold. So right here at this corner, I'm just going to follow this curve and it's going to stop right here where that vertical line and the line I just sketched intersect. And then we do have another eyelid fold above. It's not nearly as noticeable. It is a bit lighter, but we're going to go ahead and sketch that in anyway. So just follow the other eyelid fold line that you had drawn. And we do have a lot of these guidelines left. Now, they are going to get covered up when we work with our tonal shading. Really, the only ones we'll have to erase are what we see inside the inside part of the eye or the sclera where the white would be, because this is a lot lighter. Now, we do need to put in the bottom eyelid fold and kind of wrinkles around the eye. And so, where this is going to start, it's pretty much going to start just above the bottom portion where the eye opens up. And same thing, we'll just start it where these two lines intersect. Now, with these textures and folds in the skin, they don't hug the shape of the eye as closely as what happens up here. So you'll just want to notice how these lines are a little bit different. So they drop down just a little bit further. And then we have a couple light ones that start to carry over this way. And then we are seeing a few lines that emerge off the corner of the eye. Okay, so the next step that I'm going to take is I'm going to take out some of these guidelines on the inside. So we'll just erase these away. And sometimes when you wipe away or push away some of those eraser markings, it can smudge what you've already drawn. So if you have a paintbrush close to you, you can just sweep these away. And now I'm going to start working with my tortillon. So kind of like what we talked about before, there is a shadow from the upper eyelid that falls on the iris, but it also falls on the white of the eye. So I'm going to just use my tortillon, follow along there, follow along in this corner. And then for the rest of the white of the eye, we don't want to press too hard. So we don't want to darken it too much. So I'm just very lightly going over this space. Now, we can't just leave it white because it does have some value to it. So remember, when working with graphite and in drawing, when you have white paper left, this is going to represent the brightest areas of the image you're drawing or the image that you are trying to create. So as you're using your tortillon in this area, make sure that you are curving those lines. And this area where we have the tear duct, it is quite a bit darker. So I can take my tortillon, I'm just going to press a little harder. And then I'm just going to very lightly kind of fade this out. And if you get it too dark, don't be afraid to use your eraser and just gently kind of pull up some of that pencil. Now, in the corner of the eye, where the tear duct is, we do have a bit of a dark shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and just use my 6B pencil and push this dark area. And then I'm just going to blend around it just a little bit with my tortillon. So I did get part of this a little too dark, so I'm going to take my eraser and just pull out a little. And I'm going to get my tortillon again, and like what happened with the first eye, I'm just going to take my tortillon and run it on the outer edge of the iris to soften that just a little bit. Now, this particular eye, we can tell that they are wearing contacts because there's a very faint light line around the outer edge of the iris. And part of the iris texture is kind of blurred, which I believe has been caused by the contact lens that's being worn. So I'm just softening some of the textures just a little bit. And soften part of this pupil and just very carefully go around the outer edges of that light reflection so it doesn't look so sharp and in focus. And now I do need to put a little bit of value over here. Okay, so next thing I am going to do, I'm going to take my tortillon and I'm going to work on the upper eyelid area. So the inside part of the upper eyelid, where it is closest to the nose, this is going to be a bit darker because the nose is going to trap light and create some shadows. However, as we move closer to the middle portion of the eyeball, it's going to lighten up just a little bit because this part is raised and it sticks out. Now, in this particular eye, we are seeing some lighter values in this place. So I need to keep that in mind. And once I get to that point, I'm just going to let up just a little bit. So I'm not pressing as hard. And so it comes across a little more light. And then it does darken up just a little bit more once we get to the corners. Now remember, whenever you are working with your tortillons, it will lighten up some of your darker lines. So where this eyelid fold was, it has lightened up quite a bit. So I'm just going to use my 4B to go back in and add a darker value to that eyelid fold. And then I'm just going to add a little bit more value above the lighter eyelid fold that we added that isn't nearly as dark, but I'm just going to add some value for context just to give this eye a place. And then using my tortillon, I'm going to add my values to the bottom portion. So again, the inner part is going to be a bit darker. There's a little bit of a lighter value right here, close to the tear duct, but it's just a little bit lighter than the surrounding areas of the skin. Then as we move this way, it is going to lighten up just a little bit. It's kind of a bright reflection underneath the eye, fairly similar to what we saw at the top. And again, what's really important is once you are working with your tortillon, make sure you're following the lines that you've been drawing, and that is really going to help shape the object, in this case, the eye that you're creating. Now, some of those textures have lessened a little bit in terms of the darkness, so I'm going to take my 4B pencil again and just go back over and touch up some of those creases and folds that we had put in. So essentially what we're doing, we're layering the pencil kind of in a similar fashion that we would if we were painting. And I'm going to darken this area of the skin just a little bit. So I'm using my 4B, the 6B would also work, as those two pencils almost tonal shade themselves, so they don't leave a lot of texture. So I just have a few small detailed things to do. And one of these is putting in the edge of the contact. So what we're seeing, we are seeing a line right on the outer side of the iris. So if you use your 2H pencil and you're not going to make a dark, dark line, you're actually just barely going to touch the pencil to the paper. Just follow that curve of the iris. So you have a little bit of space separating the iris and that contact lens edge. So just follow that around. And if you get it, maybe too dark, you can go back in with your eraser and lighten it up a little bit. So I had to go over that line a few times to get the shape correct. So I'm just essentially going to kind of stipple with my eraser to pull up just a little bit of that pencil that I'd set down with my 2H pencil. And I kind of lost part of that darker shadow that I had up here, so I need to take my tortillon and put that back in. And on the other side, the contact lens line is very, very faint, so we don't see it nearly as well. So I'm still going to set that line in there, but it's not super noticeable. And I'm going to shape my iris just a little better. It was a little misshapen. add some of those dark values underneath the eyelid again. And we'll just blend those a little. All right, so a few other things we can put in. What you can also see in the photo is there's some blood vessels. So there's one that is really in line with the pupil right here, and it has almost a signature-like look to it. So I'm using my 2H pencil again, and just very lightly putting those lines in. And then using my 2H pencil, I'm gonna make almost tree branch-like lines. So what I'm gonna do, just really kind of erratic lines like this that branch off from one another, but these are gonna be very, very light. And these are gonna be the blood vessels in the eye that aren't nearly as noticeable. They don't stand out nearly as much as like what this one does. And so parts of these, I'm just barely touching and dragging my pencil to the paper. And there's some in the corner over here. And with these, you don't want to overdo it. You don't want those to dominate the drawing. I'm just going to put a few textured lines right here where the tear duct was. Just very lightly dragging my pencil right there. So really the main thing that I have left, and I am going to use my B pencil for this, are the eyelashes. And so these eyelashes never come up above this second eyelid fold, and they are pretty dark and really just follow the same rule of thumb that we used before. Very quick, dark hatch lines. Kind of flick your wrist, start it on this edge that we initially started with when we were drawing. These eyelashes are going to be the most dense and darkest on this line. So if you look at the photo, a lot of like the dark areas of this eye, it's really just the eyelashes. They're very thick right here on the inside kind of portion of that eyelid. Now we even have some eyelashes that are falling over the white of the eye, so we can see those as well. There aren't very many of them. There's maybe 3 or 4, but we'll be sure to add those. So remember your eyelashes on this side full curve that way, and on this side they curve this way. And then for the bottom portion, these eyelashes are very, very faint. There really aren't that many anyway. And there's a few like pretty light ones right here. There's one like kind of light one over here, but like I said, it's very, very hard to see. So as you're working with this eye, just notice the little changes and nuances that you'll want to add to help make this eye look, so it looks a little more realistic. And all these small details really do add to the eye and how interesting it is. Then I think I need to make this light reflection just a little bigger, a little more round near the bottom. Then I'm going to darken the middle of it just a little bit. And if you look really closely at the photo, you can see where there are some like faint reflections from the eyelashes. So there's just some very light lines like right here. And those a lot of those lines fall over the light reflection that's on the pupil and iris. So just other things we can add to add a bit of realism to the drawing. And there is eye number two.